The female lead tells women's stories. Remarkable, diverse, inspiring. An educational charity promoting positive female role models who show the many different routes to success and fulfillment.
So often I hear people saying, oh, how do I get started? How do I do this? How do you do it? You just start. You have to begin. And it won't be perfect and it'll be messy and it'll be hard, but you're doing something and you're on your way.
Empowering future generations of women through films and a book of 60 women donated to 18,000 schools in the UK and USA, reaching millions of young people. And through our female lead societies, we help girls to discover new role models that speak to their passions, ambitions and careers. Through our research into social media and mental health, we found a solution to the negative impact of social media on teen girls. Through a simple intervention which encouraged girls to follow different influencers, we were able to change their entire social media experience and sense of well-being. We called this campaign Disrupt Your Feed, and it reached 20 million people on social, with 330 million impressions all over the globe. So what's next? As well as inspiring girls, we're now finding ways to measurably improve the lives of older women through data, research, and the stories of those who have overcome challenges and found their own personal versions of success. We're a long way from being finished. Join us in our mission.
Are we going to talk about women's rights again? Yes, we're going to talk about it until there's balance.
Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all. I'm speaking to you from London, where we're actually in the studios filming and photographing for The Female Lead Volume 2, which is incredibly exciting, and we'll be telling you more about that in the near future. But today is all about our LinkedIn Live. And we have a fabulous guest who is speaking to us from Australia today. Her name is Shadé Zahrai, and she is going to talk to us about something that I think we all care about, we all struggle with from time to time, and that is all about how to be our best in interviews, how to get the most out of salary negotiations and strategies. And in other words, how to make the most of who we are and what we do. So let me tell you a little bit about Shadé. Don't forget, we'll have time for questions at the end. So do think about those and pop them in the question section so that we can come to you at the end. Right, context. Women have, as we know, a tendency to undersell themselves. They tend to attribute their achievements to others, to luck, or to timing. I've done it myself. Whenever I'm asked, I say, I was really, really lucky. We generally have higher levels of self-doubt. And I think we can all imagine, we all know how this impacts our career development, but it also directly affects our negotiations for salaries. So it's really important we get this into context. So we're going to have a look at what goes wrong. Shadé is going to share some really wonderful hints and tips and help us boost our confidence and get what we deserve. Shadé is a career performance specialist. She's a top influencer. She already has 1 million followers in just under a year, which is extraordinary. She's a lawyer by training. She's a TEDx speaker, and she's CEO of Influenceo Global, which is all about leadership development. And she works with some of the biggest, best companies around the world. She's been covered in all the media and helped tens of thousands of women. So I am absolutely delighted to welcome her here to our LinkedIn Live today. Welcome, Shadé.
Thank you so much, Edwina. It's such a treat to actually be here and to connect with you and the female lead. And I can't wait to actually explore what we're going to discuss today.
Well, thank you. No, we are delighted to have you. I thought what would be really good would be to start off with you helping us to understand what are the sort of typical or the biggest mistakes we tend to make. Shall we start with interviews? What is it that we get wrong, and how can you help us prepare better?
Absolutely. And it's a good place to start because we all know the feeling of what it's like when we have a looming interview or we're going through that process. And just to preface all of this, we know that there is a huge amount of research around how women face really unique challenges in achieving workplace equality. And some of the underlying reasons are systematic bias, culture issues, issues in hiring practices. So I'm not going to be exploring them, and we'll focus really on getting into the tips and the strategies for us individually to make sure that we're reclaiming our power. And so starting in the space of interviews, there are a number of things that people tend to do. And so I want to share the 3 most common mistakes that we see. So the first one is that people often subconsciously, when they're going into an interview situation, they come at it from a perspective or a position of weakness, rather than seeing it as an opportunity to actually be interviewing the organization as to whether it's a place that they actually want to work. So when you're going to an interview, typically what's going on in your mind is this subconscious thinking around, I am in need of a job. This organization has a job. That's what I need. They have something that I need. And then we develop almost a desperation around getting it. So it becomes very one-sided, and we have this kind of power play. So one piece of advice that I always give is remember that if you're interviewing, you're not the only one being interviewed. You want to see it as an opportunity to interview them, to really determine whether it's a place where you want to invest your time, where you want to invest your energy and your skills. So ask yourself, does it align with my values? Will I have opportunities for growth? Is the culture one that will support me to bring my whole self to work each day? These are often forgotten about, but really important, and allows you to go in there with a much more confident frame of mind. So that's the first one. Remember that you're not going in from a position of weakness. You have unique strengths that you're offering. The second one is, this is something we typically see with women. Women have a strong tendency to downplay their achievements and their accomplishments. And when it comes to interviews, on the one hand, yes, this reflects humility, which is a wonderful virtue to have. However, more commonly, it actually reflects this idea of external attribution, where women have a tendency to attribute their success and their achievements to others' luck and timing. And Edwina, you said you've done this and I've done this. Lots of women have done this. And on one side, it actually reflects a feeling of imposter syndrome, where you may feel undeserving of success in spite of a really strong track record of performance. We also know that women are less inclined to self-promote. So when it comes to an interview situation, a lot of women don't feel comfortable speaking about their successes, their achievements, their track record. And there was actually a really interesting study just published this year that they looked at appraisals of men and women. So they found that in terms of performance on a task, men and women objectively performed at the same level. However, women appraised themselves to be much lower in their performance, or much less in terms of what they delivered, as opposed to men. So interestingly, we have this within us where we tend to self-judge, we have views around our potential, we externally attribute, which means we don't acknowledge the effort that we've actually put in to achieve something. So the tip around here when it comes to interviews is to really focus on the effort and the skill that you've applied when you've been achieving whatever you've achieved. Think of the value that you'll be able to add to the company. Think about your strengths, your skills, and of course, any examples of when you've actually demonstrated these in practice. And then you want to share it confidently. It's not about showing off. It's not about boasting. This is something we want to move away from. It's simply about making sure the interviewer understands the value that you bring, and you need to communicate to them why you deserve to be there. So it's not self-promotion. It's just about you believing in yourself and really demonstrating that you are a credible candidate for them to consider. Now, the third mistake that we see consistently as well is that it actually applies even before you get to the interview stage. And it's when we listen to this inner critic that we have in our minds, this little voice that we have in our heads that tells us, you're not ready, you're not good enough, you're not skilled enough, you're not experienced enough, you're going to fail, so why bother trying? And so we completely hold ourselves back. When we listen to that voice, we don't take action. We take ourselves out of the race even before it started. And we develop a fear of failure. And this is something that I've consistently seen in my work with women, that there's this fear of, well, I'm not going to get it anyway, so why should I bother trying? Why should I even put myself out there? But what happens here is if you listen to these voices, you've essentially decided on behalf of the organization that you're not the right fit for the role for whatever reason. So you take the decision away from them. And it's a fundamental error that we consistently see. I actually had a woman reach out on social media very recently, and she said to me, Shadé, thank you so much for just empowering me to apply for things, because I applied for all these roles that I didn't believe I was ready for. And I've been invited to so many interviews that I never expected I would. And so she realized that she had been the one holding herself back for all of these years. Now she ended up securing a role that she absolutely didn't feel ready for, but she's so excited about. And it's all about taking that first step. So I think the key when it comes to interviews is, firstly, have confidence, back yourself. Obviously, be prepared when you go in there. But importantly, one of the pieces I love sharing with people is, if we waited until we felt 100% ready to take something on, to do something, if everyone was like that, no one would ever progress. No one would actually grow. Everyone would just stay completely stagnant and stuck, because that's not how growth works. So fundamentally, don't listen to that voice. It's trying to protect you from a risk of maybe failing or the unknown, but it's also preventing you from succeeding. So that's generally what we see happening a lot in interviews, and that's the guidance that I like to give.
I think it's fantastic guidance. I know the times I grew the most in my career was when I was really scared and I was doing something that I really didn't know if I could do or not. But when you do it, when you come through it, that sense of satisfaction is just exhilarating, absolutely fantastic. And you never go back. It's such a special moment.
Absolutely
I also just wanted to pick up on something, which is I interviewed a lot of people we had 1,500 people in my organization, some years ago now, but I interviewed a lot of people. I hired people on the questions they asked, not the questions I asked them. So I love your advice here. I think it's so important. It reflects also that quality of curiosity, doesn't it? That sense of I really want to understand and I'm interested in what you do. So I think it's beautiful advice and really well said. So have we covered preparation? Do we know, are there some things that we should do about preparing for interviews? And then perhaps maybe we have to prepare for negotiation in the same way. So please help us understand, what is our homework in preparing for these situations?
Oh, of course. And I'm so glad you raised it, because preparation, again, is one of the biggest mistakes people forget to apply, or rather the biggest mistakes people make is failing to prepare. And we know when you're prepared for something, you're actually much more confident for it. You actually speak with much more conviction. And it's fundamentally important so that you can make sure that you're actually demonstrating, again, the value that you're bringing and coming across in a really credible way. So when it comes to preparation, obviously you want to review the job description, make sure you know it really, really well. Importantly, make sure you know how it actually aligns to your skills and your experience and your strengths. And you don't need to worry if there are any gaps. If there are gaps, that's okay. Acknowledge the gaps, but be very, very clear on how other experience that you've had allows you or has allowed you to develop the skills that you need for the gap that they may have listed on that job description that you don't have. There are always transferable skills that you can actually apply. Even if you need to say, Yes, you're right. I don't have experience in that space. However, as you can see from my track record in X, Y, and Z, I'm an extremely fast learner and I'm extremely curious. So I will get in there and ask the questions that I need to ask so I can learn what I need to learn and go in there and hit the ground running. Something like that gives the interviewer confidence that even if you lack a particular skill or a piece of experience, you're demonstrating that you're open to growth. You have a growth mindset. You have a desire to develop yourself. And that's what they're looking for. So that's really, really important. It's also important to practice responses to common questions. Just become comfortable speaking about your strengths, your weaknesses, examples from your experience as well. And then a big piece is actually mentally and emotionally preparing yourself. Because interviews can be nerve-wracking. They can be anxiety-inducing. Because again, there's this sort of fear of failure component. But when you start with reminding yourself, Edwina, as you shared, reminding yourself that this is my opportunity to ask them questions as well and see if this is somewhere I want to work. So that puts you in a position of confidence. But there are also basic things you can do in terms of reminding yourself of your strengths, taking time to prime yourself and remind yourself of your track record, which helps with your imposter syndrome. But it also helps in terms of calming your central nervous system. And you touched on it, Edwina, preparation is so important when it comes to salary negotiation. And this is the part that I'm really, really passionate about helping women develop confidence in, because it's a big, big gap. And we know that if we don't address this, it's just going to continue to compound this gap that we're seeing. Now, very quickly, before I dive into some of the reasons why women often struggle when it comes to salary negotiation, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of organizational challenges, which we won't go into. But for me and my husband, so we run our business together, which is wonderful. It's so fun to actually run a business with the person you love the most. But for us, we're really passionate about advancing equality because we have a belief that men and women are like two wings of a bird. And it's only when both of these wings are equal in strength that humanity can truly fly. And it's a quote that comes from the Baha'i teachings, and it's very much inspired us in everything that we do. And so while we are both committed to actually strengthening the wing of women when it comes to professional advancement and work, we also are very, very focused on actually advancing everybody and increasing harmony at work, because fundamentally we're like two pieces of a puzzle. We need to fit, we need to lift each other up. So I like to say that because it's important to come at it from the perspective of how can we elevate everyone? And when we elevate women, everyone benefits. So let's have a look now at some of the factors that impact women when it comes to salary negotiation. So I'm going to go through them really quickly because then I want to dive into some practical, actionable things that you can all take into a negotiation with you. So the first one is that women are often concerned about the reputational impacts of them negotiating. If I'm assertive, people will think I'm bossy. And unfortunately, we have research that suggests that when women are assertive and take on traditionally male qualities of strength and confidence, they're actually judged negatively and it impacts likability. So this fear that we have around reputation, unfortunately, it's based on reality. And we know that there are biases that people have, but it shouldn't be preventing us from asking, from raising the question. We can still bring our authentic strengths around empathy and warmth into a negotiation. They're actually extremely important negotiation qualities. So that's the first one. The second one is just around gender stereotypes that impact how women feel about and perform when it comes to negotiation. So the stereotype is that as a woman, we are cooperative, we are submissive, we are communal. And men have these masculine qualities around competitiveness, assertiveness, and dominance. We sometimes take that on and place it on ourselves and say, well, I can't do that because they'll think I'm like this. I can't do that because then they'll view me in this way. And so we hold ourselves back. So that's the second one. The third piece is that women are less agentic. And agentic comes from the word agency, which is the capacity or the state of acting or exerting power. So women typically rate themselves when it comes to characteristics of assertiveness, we rate ourselves much lower. We actually believe that we have less power within organizations. And naturally, this holds us back because we don't believe that if we negotiate, anything will come from it. And then the fourth one is that as women, we typically have lower expected outcomes or expectations around what we think we'll get when it comes to negotiating. So even if someone who is a woman negotiates exceptionally well, often because of these lower expectations, they get what they want, but it's still lower than what a counterpart may have been able to get. So just a couple of things for us to be thinking about. How are we perhaps hindering our ability to negotiate? And so let's quickly move into, because I know we're going to move into some questions soon, which I'm so excited about. What are some of the things that women can do to put their best foot forward when it comes to salary negotiations? The very, very first thing is always do it. You always want to, put yourself out there for a negotiation. Never just assume something isn't negotiable. And the first one, again, is to do with preparation and practice. Practice negotiating. Practice speaking about what you will share, speaking about your value. Importantly, recall times when you took action, when you achieved something, when you challenged the status quo, because this is helping you remind yourself of your agency. And interestingly, research has found that the negotiation gap between men and women's outcomes narrows as you gain experience. So if you're practicing even with role plays, you will actually more likely have a better outcome. The second step is this is an important one, which I think is very, very relevant for women. Think about negotiating on behalf of your constituency. And this is based on research from 2016. You basically want to imagine that you're negotiating on behalf of someone else, a friend, someone you mentor, your future self. When men and women were asked to negotiate on behalf of someone else, the differences disappeared. In fact, in some instances, women actually outperformed and were able to achieve higher negotiated outcomes. So for women, we actually feel more confident and assertive when we think about it, not from the sake of what's in it for me, but how can I do this on behalf of women everywhere? Step number 3, or tip number 3, do your research to actually reduce what we call structural ambiguity. So as women, we tend to perform better when there's less ambiguity around salaries and remuneration. And this comes from research from 2016, which was published in Harvard Business Review. You want to understand what's your value in the market. And what does this mean? This is the question a lot of people ask. How do I figure that out? Look at websites like glassdoor.com, salary.com, payscale.com, and look at your region and your job title and have a look at what the salary range typically is. When you go in there, you're essentially armed with evidence about your value in the market. And then you need to back it up with evidence of your track record. So this is where you have real examples of when you delivered above and beyond, when you delivered exceptional outcomes. Have a series of these that you can actually bring with you to the negotiation. And then the fourth, which I think is a great way to end, is don't listen to your inner critic. So my doctoral research is actually all about the inner critic and how it impacts career success. So I've become very well acquainted with this inner voice that we all have. I have it, everyone I speak to seems to have it. It's essentially a sub-personality trying to protect us from harm or threat, from the possibility of failure. And it protects us by stripping us of our confidence and filling us with self-doubt so that we don't take action. It's that voice that tells us we're not ready, we're not enough, we won't succeed. And if we listen to it, then we will keep ourselves back. So the key here is acknowledge it's there. It's fine that it's there, but take action anyway. Apply for the role, ask for the negotiation, ask for what you deserve. If you don't believe in yourself and ask, it's not going to come. And the final piece I want to share before we move into questions, we need to move away from thinking that women don't possess the skills they need to negotiate. We often assume that to negotiate well, you just have to be assertive. You just have to be aggressive, which is actually not correct. There are skills that women have, like empathy, consideration, a communal approach. And of course, I am generalizing. We know that women have a tendency to demonstrate these things, not all women, and that's okay. But for those who do, we can bring these into negotiation environments. We don't need to leave them at the door, because when we can demonstrate empathy, when we can show that we're there not just for us, but actually for the sake of others, we can really reach an amazing win-win scenario, because that's what it's all about.
Wow, I think we just lived through a masterclass there. It's absolutely
There was a lot there.
There was a lot there, but it was absolutely great. And, one of the things I would just mention before we go straight to questions is that the female lead has revealed a psychological condition that we call the unentitled mindset, which you were referring to. So we've done a big study on that. And if people want to discover more and actually search for lots of advice and help on some of the elements of this, they can go to our website. And we're going to be putting up all your details and advice as well at the end of this. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that your idea of 2 equal parts, I had a leadership model called the Power of Two. And I believe I worked with my husband for 21 years.
Oh, wow.
I believe that 2 people who work together and who are opposites can do just about anything together. So I loved that you talked about that, Shadé. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So thank you. Thank you for all your wonderful advice. And now to our brilliant audience who always have many, many questions. Becky, may we have the first? I don't think that's a question.
Oh, well, maybe it's a question around the end of an interview.
I'm so sorry. It's lucky you're on the ball.
So this is a good one. What questions could you ask or should you ask at the end of an interview? So you generally want to have done your research. It will reflect really well on you if you can demonstrate that you've actually looked into the company, you understand where it's come from, you understand maybe some of the challenges, you've looked into the strategy, the vision, the values, and ask questions about that. Ask questions that are relevant to you. I think from anyone who's been on the recruiting side, it's easy to know when someone is just reeling off questions that they've prepared beforehand that actually sound great, but are not really something the person's interested in. So you want to think about, what are questions I'm genuinely interested in? And a fantastic one you can ask once you've understood more about their values or how they measure success or growth opportunities within the organization, you can ask them, was there anything in the interview or from my application that makes you feel like I wouldn't be a good fit for this role? So generally what that does is, if there is something, they might share it and say, well, actually, you haven't had experience here. And it gives you an opportunity to respond to that and say, you're right, I haven't had experience there. However, I have done X, Y, Z, and I believe those skills will be able to be applied. So there are a couple of ideas for you, but definitely do your research.
You're right. That was a brilliant question that I misunderstood. So well done. Next question, please. How do you answer the tell me all about yourself question? Yes, because you can talk for like half an hour, can't you?
You can. And you generally want to stay away from, I have a family of 7 and we love going on holiday here and my dog's name is Bongo. You can bring them in, but actually what the interviewer is interested in knowing is, who are you professionally? What are your goals? And how does that fit into what the organization is offering? So generally start with, who are you professionally? I have worked here for this many years. I have experience with this. Then highlight any key achievements you might have. Anything that's worth highlighting, because of course they've got your CV, your application, they can see it, but it's always good for you to reiterate what you want them to remember about you. So then you share that. And then the third step is to actually share, what are your goals? And how does it fit in with the job that you're applying for? And of course, you can throw in some personality too if you want to mention your dog Bongo or the holiday you love or your hobby. But that's a really, really great way to think about putting it together. Think about it from a professional perspective and pepper it with some personality.
Very good. How do you answer, what is your greatest weakness?
Great question. I have a lot of people asking me, oh, should I lie? And we don't want to lie when it comes to any interview question. However, you can be very strategic about what you choose to share. Generally, don't share anything that's directly linked to the job you're applying for. If you're applying for a role in sales, don't say that your weakness is in sales, because that will be a red flag for the people interviewing you. But you could say something like, well, my weakness is that I get very nervous speaking in group meetings. So you share what it is, something that's not essential to the role itself. What is the weakness that you have? How are you working on that weakness? You want to demonstrate that you have a growth mindset, you're open to developing new skills, and you're very aware, you've got the self-awareness to know what you need to develop in. So how are you developing that? And lastly, what's been the impact of you focusing on that? So, for example, I get very nervous speaking in group meetings. I spoke with my current manager and I've actually enrolled in a course, a Toastmasters course or a presentation course. And I've been applying that in meetings to try and encourage me to be more confident. And actually my team has noticed. So step 3, what's the impact? My team has noticed that I'm speaking more and I'm speaking with more coherence and fluency. So it's been great. Really simple example of how you can actually address the question.
Fantastic. Clear asks, how do you apply as a fresh graduate when a job you're interested in requires experience? That's the catch-22, isn't it?
It is the catch-22. How are you ever supposed to get experience if every job requires you to have experience? I would say apply anyway and talk about experience that you have from your studies, whether it's volunteer work, whether it's internships, whether it's being involved in sororities or student organizations or clubs, anything extra that you've done, even if you've coached a team, a sports team, something like this, pull out the key skills that you have little examples of how you've demonstrated them that actually meet the needs of the actual job description. Ideally, you want to get it to a point where you're in the interview room, you've made it there, you've got the foot in the door, and then you can demonstrate your enthusiasm, your energy, and why you're going to be a great fit. It's just that initial stage. So really highlight all of the skills that you've developed from the other things that you've done that may not be professional work experience, but still experience.
Critic, I hope I pronounced that right. Do you have a good mantra to repeat to raise one's confidence just before interview? Excellent.
Ooh, that's a good one. I don't actually have one that like a default one, but we do know that actually repeating positive mantras or positive affirmations prior to interviews, prior to sporting games, they actually do decrease your stress, decrease your anxiety, and give you this air of confidence. So highly encourage you to do it. And another quick tip that we know from some very recent research is around a really great way, especially if you're nervous, to calm down your nerves and calm down that inner chatter, is actually to refer to yourself in the third person. And it's a form of psychological distancing. So Carrot, again, I hope we're saying your name correctly. You would say to yourself, Carrot, you've got this. Carrot, you're going to be fantastic. Carrot, make sure you mention your strengths and your value, the value you're bringing. So you actually act as your coach. And it's been amazing that the research has found that this is an incredible way of creating the distance so you're in the right head frame when you come to actually perform.
So long as you don't refer to yourself as the third person in the interview.
Yes, big caveat there. Make sure you're not talking about yourself. That would make for a very funny interview. I'll give you that much.
Okay, do we have time for one more? What are your top 3 tips for preparing for a virtual job interview in what is now the new normal, which is this?
This is the new normal. And in a way, it's kind of broken down barriers and connected people that weren't connected before. So I think there's been a lot of positive that's come from it. In terms of preparing for a virtual interview, so you prepare in exactly the same way as you do for an in-person interview, but there are a couple of additional things. So firstly, you want to make sure that your setup is appropriate. Bear in mind, when you're on a virtual interview, they can see everything behind you. Ideally, you want to be, if you've got a bit of clutter, just be against a plain wall. Plain wall keeps it very easy. You want to make sure you are well lit. Sometimes we have the camera facing a window, in which case the window is very bright. We're just a silhouette. So if you can face natural light like a window, that's fantastic. Or have some lamps that are around you to actually light you up. Importantly as well, on a virtual interview, it can be a little bit off-putting because you've got all these faces staring at you. And so you can have a heightened degree of sort of stress and anxiety. You want to make sure you're calming yourself. You want to make sure that you don't lean back in your chair, because if you lean back, your body takes on a slouching position. And we know from research that a slouching position can lead to feelings of disempowerment, lack of confidence, increases in cortisol. So make sure you're sitting upright. Bear in mind as well, they can also see what your hands are doing. They can see any nervous fidgets or tics that you might have. So think that you're presenting. And I always say that think about having a smile, a constant smile throughout everything. And Edwina, I've noticed you do this a lot. Even your resting face is sort of this, it's got this warmth to it. So even when it comes to interviews, see if you can bring that warmth with you, because there's something called the stereotype content model, where people have a tendency to judge you initially on 2 things. So obviously you've got first impressions, but beyond that, you've got this model which suggests they judge you based on warmth and competence. Warmth comes first because warmth relates to trust. Do I trust this person? And then competence is to do with how competent you appear, how good at your job you might be, the language that you use, your confidence. Competence leads to or links to respect. So do I trust this person based on their warmth? Do I respect this person based on their competence? And this is a winning combination when it comes to actually in interviews being able to convey that, trust me, I'm the right person for this. So they would be my tips when it comes to Zoom interviews. Make sure noises are as minimized as possible. Don't have your email up, have your phone on silent, ideally off the table so that it can't bother you. They would be my tips. Now, I know that this was the final question, and I just want to share before we do wrap up, if there are, I know lots of professional women have tuned in and have been watching. It's been great if any men actually come in and watch too, because obviously, we're all inclusive here. We want to support everyone. But I do also have a free mini training for professional women focusing on the research around perfectionism and imposter syndrome and what we tend to do as women that holds us back at work, as well as a negotiation essentials ebook. So you can download it by visiting, here we go, it's right on the screen, shadezahrai.com/audio-training. And if you go in there, you can download them. And I encourage you to take the time to go through it, to make sure that you're reminding yourself of everything that we've actually explored and discussed, and then put it into practice, because it's all about taking action. Don't listen to the voice. Remind yourself you have unique value to offer. You have strengths. You just need to apply them and take action in spite of whatever that inner voice is telling you.
Invaluable, absolutely brilliantly said. Really, thank you for sharing so much of what I know will really help a lot of people. I often talk about active listening. I think it's such an important quality that people can see that you're really paying them attention with all of your senses. And you have been very, very easy to listen to. And someone just made a noise behind me, which, anyway.
One of the beautiful things about the virtual environment is we're all, a lot of us are in new environments, new studios, new home environments. The kids are popping up, the animals are popping up. And I think it just connects us on a real human level. So I actually really like it.
We're all really human and
we are
make mistakes, and that's what's beautiful. So Shadé, thank you so much. We've shared and we'll leave the link in for you to get so much more from her brilliant skills. Can I just mention to you, thank you all for being here and joining us. We have next week on Thursday the 29th another LinkedIn Live, and we have the fabulous apprentices Linda Plant joining us. So I'm sure we'll learn some other very valuable things. But until then, a very warm and huge thank you to you down under today, Shadé Zahrai. It's been a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel a privilege to actually be here and connect with you and the female lead. I'm such a fan, and so much admiration I have for the wonderful work that you do. So thank you for everything.